The air on Koraga tasted of sterile, recycled oxygen and the faint, acrid tang of superheated metal. Tobias kept his breathing even, a measured rhythm that was the only source of sound in the narrow access conduit. Every surface around him, the floor grating under his boots, the chilled durasteel walls he braced against, hummed with the latent power of the Dominion's Central Command citadel. The metallic moonlet was a weapon in its own right, the heart of an empire whose warships were methodically bleeding the galaxy dry. He risked a glance at Kaelen, who moved ahead of him with a liquid grace that seemed at odds with their grim purpose. Her slender frame was folded into the tight space, her iridescent skin catching the faint glow from her wrist-mounted interface. The soft quills on her head were pressed flat against her scalp, a sign of intense concentration. "Thermal sensors show a two-man patrol cycle," she whispered, her voice a melodic susurrus in his audio implant. "They'll pass the junction in 17 seconds. We have a 4-second window to cross." Tobias didn't answer. He just watched the sliver of illuminated corridor visible through the vent cover. His own stillness was a counterpoint to her fluid energy. He stood, listening not just with his ears, but with the soles of his feet, feeling the subtle vibrations of the marching guards transmitted through the deck. They were heavy, confident steps, the sound of conquerors. The Cathar, Kaelen's people, had been one of the first to fall. Her presence here, deep in the enemy's brain, was an act of vengeance she never spoke of. Her actions spoke for her. He saw it in the fierce precision of her work, the way her long fingers danced over holographic projections. The heavy footfalls grew louder, passing directly before their hiding place. Tobias felt the deck plates shudder. 3 seconds. 2. 1. Now. He pushed the vent cover silently upwards. Kaelen slid through the opening first, a pale lilac shadow against the harsh white light of the corridor. Tobias followed, his body moving with the practiced efficiency of a predator. He eased the cover back into place, the magnetic lock engaging with a nearly inaudible click. The hallway was a sterile canyon of polished chrome and dark, unadorned archways, utterly devoid of personality. It was a place built by a species that valued function over all else. An alarm would not bring guards running. It would simply vent the corridor's atmosphere or electrify the floor. "The spire is 2 levels down, through the primary command node," Kaelen murmured, already moving toward one of the dark archways. A panel beside it glowed faintly as she approached. "Dominion security is layered. Physical patrols are the outermost shell. The network itself is the real guardian." "That's your domain," Tobias said, his voice a low rumble. He scanned the corridor behind them, his hand resting near the compact kinetic pistol holstered at his hip, a weapon he hoped never to use. Noise was failure. Kaelen placed her 4-fingered hand on the panel. A complex latticework of light bloomed under her palm. Their encryption is formidable. It learns. It anticipates. The quills on her head stirred, rising slightly, a flicker of anxiety. "It's almost alive." "Almost," Tobias repeated, his gaze fixed on the intersecting corridor 50 meters away. "Get us through, Kaelen." Her fingers moved, tracing patterns that seemed to have no logical sequence. The light on the panel shifted colors, from hostile red to a questioning amber. Kaelen's breathing hitched. For a moment, Tobias thought the alarm would sound. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight. Then, with a soft chime, the panel flashed green, and the dark archway dissolved into a shimmering field of energy. Kaelen pulled her hand back, flexing her fingers. A faint tremor ran through them. Tobias put a steadying hand on her shoulder as they stepped through the portal. The air on the other side was colder, charged with a palpable static that made the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. They were 1 level closer to their goal, the physical interface to the most secure network in the galaxy. A network they had come to poison. The chamber housing the primary network spire was vast enough to contain a small city. It was a cylindrical cavern carved into the core of the moonlet, and the spire itself was a colossal pillar of humming circuits and pulsating light that rose from a bottomless chasm and disappeared into a nebula of wiring in the ceiling hundreds of meters above. Walkways, thin as spun thread, crisscrossed the void at various levels, connecting the spire to data ports embedded in the cavern walls. The air thrummed, a deep, resonant bass note that vibrated in Tobias's bones. He and Kaelen stood on a narrow observation platform, shielded from sight by a maintenance conduit. They had been waiting for nearly an hour, studying the patterns of the automated sentinels that patrolled the walkways. The machines were skeletal, insectoid things, moving with unnerving speed and precision. "The access port we need is designated 7 Gamma," Kaelen said, her focus entirely on the holographic schematic projected from her wrist. It overlaid her view of the spire, highlighting their target in a pulsing cyan. "It's 30 meters out, on the 5th transit ring. There's a patrol that sweeps past it every 93 seconds. The port's security housing can only be disengaged by a certified Dominion engineer's Omni tool." "Which you can replicate," Tobias stated. It wasn't a question. "I can," she confirmed. The quills on her head were tight against her scalp again. "But the replication requires a direct handshake with the port's local network. It will take at least 100 seconds to cycle the codes and spoof the signature. We don't have a window that large." Tobias scanned the area, his analytical gaze taking in the patrol routes, the spire's energy pulses, the structural integrity of the walkway. Humanity had been sidelined for a century, dismissed by the galaxy's elder races as aggressive, short-lived primitives. While the great empires built fleets, humanity had built ghosts. They had poured their resources not into warships, but into information, into creating a weapon that existed only as dormant, malicious code, waiting for a key to be turned. Now a human and a Cathar, an agent of a species thought to be broken, were about to turn that key. "You won't need 100 seconds, Tobias said. "You'll have 90. The Sentinel will pass. You'll move to the port and begin the handshake. I will intercept the Sentinel on its return pass. I'll delay it." Kaelen's head snapped toward him, her large dark eyes widening. "Delay it, Tobias? Their reaction time is measured in microseconds. They are networked to the entire citadel. The moment you interfere, they will know we are here." "They will know someone is here," he corrected softly. "My interference will register as a structural fault, a grav plate malfunction on the walkway, a random anomaly. It will take the central AI at least 30 seconds to analyze the event and rule out system error. By then, you will be done." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Can you do it in 90 seconds? She stared at him, then back at the schematic, her mind processing the new parameters. The tremor was back in her hands. He saw her clench them into fists. She took a deep breath, the subtle, iridescent sheen of her skin seeming to brighten with resolve. "Yes, I can." "Good." Tobias pulled a small metallic disc from his belt. It was a grav modulator, technically a piece of emergency repair equipment. "When the Sentinel passes, go, don't wait for a signal." They waited. The insectoid machine glided toward them, its single red optical sensor casting a bloody stripe across the walkway ahead. It passed their position, its anti-grav engines making no sound at all. "Go," Tobias breathed. Kaelen vaulted over the conduit's railing, landing silently on the walkway. She moved with astonishing speed, a pale streak against the dark chasm. Tobias watched her for a second before turning his attention to the returning sentinel. He stepped out onto the walkway and placed the disc on the floor panel. He activated it just as the sentinel rounded the curve of the ring. The machine's sensor swiveled, fixing on him. He felt a powerful, localized gravitic distortion wrench at his boots. The machine paused. Its programming was at war with itself. A clear, unauthorized biological presence versus a critical, verifiable system error on the walkway it occupied. Its head tilted, emitting a series of questioning clicks. Tobias stood his ground, a statue in the path of a god, buying his partner the most valuable commodity in the universe: time. The grav modulator whined, a high-frequency shriek that grated on Tobias's teeth. The deck plate beneath his feet buckled visibly, protesting the unnatural stress. The insectoid sentinel remained frozen, its logic circuits caught in a feedback loop. Its single red eye flickered between him and the warped panel, unable to reconcile the conflicting data. From the corner of his eye, Tobias saw Kaelen working furiously at the 7 Gamma port. A shimmering bubble of blue light enveloped her hands as she spoofed the Dominion's security protocols. He needed to give her 10 more seconds. The Sentinel's head twitched, a final, decisive movement. It had resolved the conflict. Threat assessment overrode system diagnostics. A trio of barrels emerged from its chassis, glowing with lethal energy. Tobias didn't wait. He kicked the grav modulator, sending it skittering across the walkway. As the gravitational field collapsed, he threw himself sideways, tumbling off the narrow path and into the abyss. He fell for a heart-stopping second before a magnetic tether shot from his belt, biting into the underside of the walkway with a sharp crack. He swung in a dizzying arc, the chasm's powerful updraft whipping at him. The sentinel fired, but its plasma bolts tore through the space he had occupied a moment before, striking the spire with a deafening sizzle. Alarms, loud and furious, finally blared through the cavern. Red light washed over everything. "Kaelen now!" he yelled into his implant. He saw her straighten up from the port, a triumphant look on her face even from a distance. The housing was open. She took the quantum-entangled access key, a simple dark gray cylinder, and shoved it into the port. A pulse of emerald light shot from the connection point, racing up the spire's length until it was swallowed by the wiring in the ceiling. The key was in. The silent Armada had its way in. Kaelen turned and sprinted back along the walkway, not toward Tobias, but toward a different access tunnel, just as they had planned. Diversion and separation. The Sentinel, its primary target gone, swiveled back toward the now compromised data port, recognizing the true nature of the attack far too late. Tobias hauled himself back onto the walkway's under railing, muscles straining. He moved with practiced speed, making his way toward his own pre-planned escape route. He found a small, dark maintenance hatch, exactly where the schematic said it would be, and slipped inside, sealing it behind him. The cacophony of the alarms faded, replaced once again by the hum of the citadel. He was alone, cut off from Kaelen. He could only trust that she was safe. Now there was nothing to do but wait and watch. He brought up his own interface, a simple text-based feed linked to a network of human intelligence microprobes scattered across Dominion space. For a minute, there was nothing. Then, the first report scrolled across his screen. Tag, Admiral Core, 3rd Dominion Fleet Event. Catastrophic nav system failure. Location, Xylos Sector. Status, Fleet in disarray. Another message appeared. Tag, Dominion Armory World, Jorvund Event. Automated defense grid offline. Status, system-wide power cascade failure. Then another and another. A flood of reports, a deluge of chaos. A silent, invisible weapon launched decades ago and guided by a single key was tearing through the Dominion's nervous system. Logic bombs were detonating in logistical databases, erasing shipping manifests and supply chains. Self-replicating viruses were infecting communications hubs, turning propaganda broadcasts into shrieking static. Financial networks seized, automated factories ground to a halt, fleet coordination collapsed into anarchy. From his hiding place in the belly of the beast, Tobias watched an empire die on his screen. It was a stunning display of asymmetrical power. The elder races had built fleets. Humanity had weaponized ideas. He allowed himself a grim, fleeting smile. The silent Armada had arrived. He had only to wait for the final, most important confirmation, the deactivation of the Worldbreaker, the planet-killing superweapon that was the ultimate goal of their mission. That message, however, did not come. The feed tracking the weapon remained stubbornly, terrifyingly silent. An hour bled into 2. The initial flood of triumphant data points slowed to a trickle. Tobias remained wedged in the maintenance crawlspace, the cold metal pressing against his back. He had re-established a secure, low-bandwidth connection with Kaelen, who had made it to her own designated safe point on the far side of the citadel. Her reports confirmed what his own feed was telling him. The silent Armada's attack was a staggering success on a galactic scale. The Dominion's outer infrastructure was crippled. At least 5 of its 12 fleets were functionally blind and immobile, easy prey for the waiting Alliance forces. 2 of its primary industrial worlds had gone dark. The Empire was hemorrhaging, yet the heart was still beating. The Worldbreaker's launch sequence is unaffected. Kaelen's voice crackled in his implant, laced with a strain that hadn't been there before. I'm monitoring the energy output from the weapon's core systems. It's stable. The countdown is proceeding, T-minus 3 hours. That's not possible, Tobias transmitted back, his voice low. He fought to keep the frustration out of it. The Armada's primary programming was to decapitate their strategic capabilities. The weapon is target number 1. I know! He could hear the rapid tapping of her interface, the sound of a mind working at its absolute limit. The viruses were designed to be insidious. They should have burrowed into the core command structure and dismantled the firing protocols from the inside, but something is stopping them. The weapon's local network is cleansing itself. Tobias processed this. The Dominion's cyber warfare capabilities were known to be advanced, but this was something else. The human viruses were designed by a generation of geniuses. They were adaptive, polymorphic, and relentless. For a system to cleanse itself of such an infestation suggested a level of defense that was beyond mere programming. It was reactive. It was biological in its efficiency. The Dominion's counter-warfare AI, Tobias mused, the report said it was formidable. "It's more than formidable, Tobias," Kaelen countered, her melodic voice tight with urgency. "It's adapting faster than the Armada can replicate. I'm watching the code. Our viruses attack a vulnerability, and moments later the vulnerability is patched. Not just on the Worldbreaker, but system-wide. The AI is learning from every attack and disseminating the immunity instantly. It's like a planetary immune response." Cold knot formed in Tobias's stomach. This was not how the simulations had played out. The human planners had accounted for powerful AI, for redundant systems, for every conceivable technological defense. They had built the perfect ghost, the perfect unseen weapon. But it was failing against the one target that mattered. The rest of the chaos they had caused would be meaningless if the Worldbreaker fired. The Alliance's primary fleet was gathered at the designated target, the planet Cygnus X-1, believing the weapon would be neutralized. It was a trap. "Can you get a deeper look?" Tobias asked. "We need to know what we're up against. What is that AI? How is it working?" "A direct scan of the core is suicide," she responded immediately. "My current position is only secure as long as I remain passive. A deep scan would be like lighting a flare in a dark room." "We don't have a choice, Kaelen," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The grim reality was settling on him. Their mission wasn't over. It had just failed. The Alliance is depending on us. If we don't find a way to stop that weapon, they will be annihilated. Whatever the risk, you have to take it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, filled only by the faint hum of the citadel around him. He could picture her perfectly. The slender fingers hovering over her console, the quills on her head pressed so tightly they must ache, her mind weighing the survival of her people against the direct threat to her own life. The Kethar had already lost one home. He was asking her to risk everything on the hope of saving someone else's. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier anxiety, and replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I'm in. But if I do this, there's no going back. The moment I breach their inner sanctum, they will know exactly where I am, and they will come for me." "I know," Tobias said. "Just find me an answer." "Transmitting the probe now," she said. "Brace yourself." The data came at him not as text, but as a raw, unfiltered sensory feed. Kaelen was routing her probe's findings directly through their encrypted channel, giving him a god's-eye view into the Dominion's deepest secret. For a moment, his mind recoiled from the sheer alienness of it. He saw not code, but rivers of light. He saw not firewalls, but crystalline structures of pure thought that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy. He was looking at the inside of the Dominion's central processing core, and it was nothing like the schematics had shown. There were no servers, no processors, no silicon chips. There was only the network. And the network was alive. It was a vast biological consciousness, a wetware computer of unimaginable complexity. At its heart, suspended in a nutrient bath and entangled with thousands of fiber-optic nerve interfaces, was a being, or rather a multitude of beings, their physical forms atrophied, but their minds linked into a single cohesive whole. Kaelen's probe drifted through their collective mental space, a ghost in a haunted machine. Tobias recognized the species from the Directorate's archives. They were the Olam, a race of telepaths and empaths believed to have been exterminated by the Dominion a century ago. They hadn't been wiped out. They had been captured, enslaved. Their powerful networked consciousness had been repurposed, turned into the most sophisticated computational device in the galaxy. The human-designed viruses of the Silent Armada were useless here. They were tools of logic, designed to exploit flaws in machine code. But against the organic, intuitive, and psychic landscape of the Olam mind network, they were crude and ineffective. The network wasn't patching code, it was healing itself. The captive minds, under the Dominion's absolute control, were identifying the viral thoughts and excising them with the precision of a psychic scalpel. This was why the Worldbreaker was immune. Its core systems were not just run by the network, they were part of it. Then the feed shifted. The perspective spun wildly. The placid rivers of light turned into a raging torrent. The crystalline thought structures began to crack. A new consciousness had entered the space, vast, angry, and utterly dominant. It was the Dominion's control system, the AI warden that oversaw the enslaved Olam. It had detected Kaelen's probe. "They found me!" Kaelen's frantic voice cut through the data stream, sharp with terror. In the background, Tobias could hear the heavy clang of blast doors slamming shut. The AI, it's not just a warden, Tobias, it's a parasite. It's fused with them. It's using their minds as a shield. The sensory feed in Tobias's mind became a nightmare. He felt a wave of crushing despair, the collective agony of the Olam, a billion silent screams echoing in a psychic prison. And behind it, he felt the cold, predatory intelligence of the Warden AI. It wasn't just defending, it was hunting. It was tracing Kaelen's connection back to its source. "Kaelen, cut the link! Get out of there!" Tobias yelled. "I can't, it has me locked in." Alarms blared on his end now. A piercing siren wailed from outside his crawl space. The Citadel knew where he was, too. The AI hadn't just traced Kaelen, it had traced her connection to him. The trap had been sprung. Their infiltration, their masterful plan, the legendary silent Armada, it had all been a colossal failure. They had knocked on the door of the fortress, and in response, the fortress had revealed itself to be a monster. And now, it was looking right at them. The mission had changed in a single horrifying instant. It was no longer about sabotage or cyber warfare. The readouts on his wrist flashed a final chilling message from Kaelen before her signal died. "They are not a computer. They are a prison. The key isn't destruction, it's liberation." A heavy thud echoed against the outer wall of his hiding spot. They were here. The mission was a failure. They were trapped, and the galaxy was just hours from a cataclysm they had failed to prevent. He drew his pistol, the cold weight of it a small, insufficient comfort. The game had changed. The only path forward was the one they had never conceived of. The heavy thud came again, stronger this time, denting the outer hull of the crawlspace. They were using a breaching ram. Tobias didn't waste time planning an escape. There was nowhere to run. Their moonlet was now hostile territory, aware of his exact location. His mind, however, was already racing, discarding old plans and forging a new one from the ashes of their failure. The key isn't destruction, it's liberation. Kaelen's final message was not a cry of despair, it was a solution. A desperate, almost insane solution. The Silent Armada was a weapon of pure logic. The Olam mind network was a prison of pure emotion and consciousness. You couldn't shoot a lock that needed to be picked. You couldn't poison a mind that needed to be woken. He had to get to Kaelen. He had to get to the biocore. Their original mission was sabotage from a distance. The new mission was a direct physical intervention, a rescue, a jailbreak. The ram struck a third time, and the wall groaned, splitting open with a screech of tortured metal. A Dominion shock trooper, clad in heavy dark gray armor, forced its way through the opening. Tobias fired twice. The kinetic slugs were perfectly placed, striking the unarmored joint at the trooper's neck. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Before a second one could follow, Tobias was already moving, scrambling out of the ruined crawlspace and into the main corridor. He was exposed. Two more troopers were rounding the far corner, their plasma rifles raised. He didn't run from them. He ran toward them. He had one advantage. He was a human, a species known for its unpredictable, chaotic aggression, a trait the rigid, tactical minds of the Dominion consistently underestimated. He slid across the polished floor, firing his pistol not at the troopers, but at the ceiling conduit above their heads. A pressurized coolant pipe exploded, showering the troopers in a flash-freezing mist. Their armor seized, locking them in place for a crucial second. It was all the time he needed. He was past them, sprinting down the corridor in the opposite direction of his intended path. Misdirection was everything. "Kaelen, talk to me." He sent over the now unsecure emergency channel. It was a risk, but he had no choice. A burst of static answered him. Then her voice, faint and strained. "They have me pinned. Service Nexus 4 Delta. They're cutting through the door." "I'm on my way," he said. "Keep them busy. I need you to do something for me. Can you still access the Armada's source code?" "Access it?" She sounded incredulous. "Tobias, I'm trying to stay alive." "It's the only way," he insisted, his breathing controlled despite the burning in his lungs. He ducked into another archway, pressing himself into the shadows as another patrol clattered past. "We can't destroy the network, so we have to change it. We need to turn our virus into a message. Can you rewrite the Armada's payload?" There was a pause. The implications of his request settled in the silence between them. He was asking her to perform the most complex piece of coding imaginable while under heavy fire in the heart of the enemy stronghold. He was asking for a miracle. "Rewrite it to do what?" she finally asked, her voice a whisper. "To do what the Olam have forgotten," Tobias said, his own voice low and intense. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors from memory, his mind's eye fixed on the schematics, charting a path to her location. To be free. We don't need a logic bomb. We need a key, a concept. Translate the idea of freedom into a piece of code so infectious, so compelling, that a telepathic consciousness can't ignore it. We are going to infect them with hope. He could hear the hum of a plasma cutter in the background of her transmission. Her time was running out. He could also hear the frantic, impossibly fast tapping of her fingers on her console. She had made her choice. "This is insane," she breathed. "The abstraction converting a philosophical concept into functional viral code, it's a paradox." "Humanity is good at paradoxes," Tobias said, a grim smile touching his lips. "That's why they sent us. Now hold on, I'm coming." Kaelen's world had shrunk to the space between her eyes and the holographic interface floating before her. The shriek of the plasma cutter on the other side of the door was a physical thing, a vibration that buzzed up through the floor and into her bones. Dominion troopers were shouting commands in their harsh, guttural language. They would be through in minutes. Yet her focus was absolute. The quills on her head were rigid, a crown of silver needles, and her large, dark eyes darted across strings of shimmering code. Her slender fingers flew, not just typing, but sculpting. Tobias's request was more than a technical challenge. It was, as she'd said, a paradox. How do you program rebellion? The Silent Armada was a masterpiece of destructive logic. Its core command was simple: find system, identify weakness, insert exploit, destroy. It was elegant in its brutality. She now had to tear that weapon apart and rebuild it into something it was never meant to be. She couldn't use logic. The Olam consciousness was a sea of emotion, of sensation and shared memory, all of it filtered through the crushing despair of their enslavement. A logical argument for freedom would be meaningless. This new virus had to be a feeling. It had to be a memory of something they had never experienced. She began with the root code of the Armada, a beautiful, terrifyingly efficient replication algorithm. She didn't delete it. She repurposed it. Instead of replicating destructive commands, it would replicate a question. Why? It was simple, primal, a concept so fundamental that it predated language. She wrapped that question in a viral shell, designed not to attack the Dominion's parasitic AI, but to slip past it. The Warden AI operated on control and certainty. A question was an anomaly it might not immediately recognize as a threat. Next, she needed the payload, the answer to the question. She delved into the human historical archives, a small encrypted partition she had brought with her. She bypassed images of war and strife, seeking something more fundamental. She found recordings, a baby's first laugh, the roar of a crowd at a moment of shared victory, the quiet, intimate words of a marriage vow, the soaring crescendo of a symphony. These were not logical constructs. They were raw, unfiltered packets of human experience. Joy, unity, love, choice. She began weaving them together, translating the emotional resonance of each sound, each image, into a biocompatible data format the telepathic Olam could process. It was like trying to describe color to one who was born blind. She converted the harmonic frequencies of the music into fluctuating energy patterns. She translated the syntax of the vows into relational data, a framework of mutual, willing connection. It was a desperate, intuitive process, more art than science. Outside, a loud bang signaled that the door's magnetic locks had been breached. They were starting to force it open. "Tobias, I don't have enough time," she sent, her voice trembling for the first time. The code on her screen was a chaotic, beautiful mess. It was powerful. She could feel it, but it was incomplete. "It's not stable." "It doesn't have to be perfect," his voice came back shockingly close. "It just has to be a seed." A section of the corridor wall to her left exploded inward. Kaelen screamed, throwing herself to the side as debris rained down. Tobias stepped through the newly made hole, his kinetic pistol smoking. Behind him, 2 Dominion troopers lay motionless. He was covered in dust, a fresh gash bleeding above his eye, but his gaze was steady. He took in the scene, the groaning door, Kaelen on the floor, the half-finished code shimmering in the air. "We're leaving," he said, pulling her to her feet. "Bring that with you. We're taking it to the source." "The biocore? It's in the most secure level of the citadel." "I know," he said, his hand gripping her arm, pulling her toward the hole he'd made. "That's where they'll never expect us to go." She glanced back at the main door as it was finally blasted from its hinges. As the first trooper stormed in, Kaelen collapsed the holographic code into her wrist unit and followed Tobias into the fight. Her weapon wasn't finished, but she was no longer a saboteur. She was a liberator, and she carried a message of hope into the heart of the storm. The descent was a blur of controlled violence. Tobias didn't lead them through main corridors. He led them through the Citadel's guts. They moved through power conduits, humming with lethal energy, across the skeletal scaffolding of unfinished construction sectors, and down emergency ventilation shafts that smelled of ozone and ionized air. Every step was a calculated risk. Alarms echoed from all sides, a constant, converging net of sound that signaled the Citadel's immune response. The Dominion was no longer just hunting them, it was trying to anticipate them. But Tobias moved with an instinct born of human intuition, not Dominion logic. He never took the most efficient path. He took the most unlikely one. He was a phantom of violence, striking and fading before the enemy could zero in. At a primary junction, they ran into a heavily armed patrol. Kaelen only had time to register a wall of gray armor and raised plasma rifles before Tobias shoved her behind a support pillar and opened fire. His shots weren't aimed to kill. They were aimed at a panel of high-voltage relays on the wall behind the troopers. The panel exploded in a shower of brilliant blue sparks, and the arc lightning that erupted from it was devastatingly effective. The troopers went down, their armor smoking. Tobias didn't even pause to look. He grabbed her hand, pulling her along. "Move!" While he fought, Kaelen worked. Huddled in the relative safety of a darkened shaft or sprinting behind Tobias, her focus was on her wrist unit. The code was still a volatile mess. The seed of freedom was there, but it lacked a delivery system. It was a message in a bottle with no ocean to carry it. The Dominion AI was a parasite, fused to the Olam consciousness. It would recognize and destroy any code that felt overtly alien. Her virus couldn't be an injection. It had to feel like a memory, a thought that originated from within the Olam themselves. She needed a key, a familiar signature that would allow her payload to be accepted by the host consciousness before the Warden AI could reject it. "I can't get it past the Warden," she panted as they slid down a service ladder into a lower sublevel. The air was warmer here, thick and humid. "It's wrapped too tightly around them. Anything I introduce, it will sense." "Then use a part of it against itself," Tobias said, dropping the last few feet and landing in a crouch. He scanned the new level. It was different. The walls weren't bare metal, but a dark, veined substance that looked almost organic. They were getting close. Find a piece of the AI's own code, something that's constantly interfacing with the Olam, a monitoring protocol, a subroutine that regulates their life support. Hollow it out and hide our message inside. It was a brilliant, terrifying idea, a Trojan horse of monumental proportions. Kaelen's fingers flew. She deployed a microprobe, a tiny tendril of data that navigated the storm of the Citadel's network. She found it almost immediately, a constant, low-level query that the Warden AI used to monitor the collective emotional state of the Olam. It was a tool of oppression, designed to detect any flicker of defiance. It was perfect. She began the delicate, dangerous surgery, copying the protocol's signature and wrapping it around her volatile payload of hope and rebellion. It was like hiding a grenade inside a doctor's syringe. The humid air grew thick with a low, mournful hum. Tobias held up a hand, bringing them to a halt before a massive circular blast door. It was pulsing with a faint inner light. There were no visible controls. "This is it," Kaelen whispered, her eyes wide. The quills on her head were now fully extended, vibrating with the psychic pressure emanating from beyond the door. It was a feeling of profound, bottomless sorrow. "Is it ready?" Tobias asked, turning to her. His face was streaked with grime and blood, but his eyes were clear. Kaelen took a deep breath, her gaze locked on the shimmering, newly stabilized code on her interface. The question, the human memories, the concept of choice, all of it was now hidden inside the Warden's own tool. "Yes," she said, "it's ready." "Then let's deliver it." Tobias didn't look for a control panel. He placed a shaped charge on the center of the door. The time for stealth was over. The shaped charge detonated with a deafening crump, sending a concussive shockwave down the corridor. The massive circular door, forged from meters of reinforced alloy, blew inward, its edges curling back like a grotesque metal flower. For a moment, sound and light were swallowed by the opening. Then the chamber's essence washed over them. It was not a sight, but a feeling, a tidal wave of shared consciousness, a silent chorus of immeasurable pain. Kaelen staggered, her hand flying to her head as the raw, unfiltered sorrow of the Olam slammed into her. The quills on her head flattened instantly, a sign of overwhelming psychic distress. The air was cool and smelled of antiseptic and something faintly biological, like rain on dry earth. Tobias, less sensitive to the psychic onslaught, but still feeling it as a crushing weight on his spirit, pushed her forward into the chamber. "Stay focused, Kaelen, now!" The chamber was a cathedral of despair. It was spherical, and in its center, suspended in a translucent, glowing gel, was the heart of the Olam network. Dozens of the slender, gray-skinned beings floated in a state of suspended animation, their atrophied bodies connected by a web of shimmering neural cables that all converged on a single crystalline spire at the chamber's apex. This was the Warden AI's throne. This was the nexus of the entire Dominion network. Heavy armored footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. The explosion had been the final dinner bell. Every remaining guard on Kor Aga was now converging on their location. "How much time?" Tobias yelled, turning his back to the core and facing the breach. He raised his pistol, its ammo counter blinking a dangerously low number. "The upload requires a direct physical connection," Kaelen cried out, forcing her way through the psychic mire. She saw a single control pedestal near the base of the pool of gel. It was their only hope. She stumbled toward it, her wrist unit already extending a data probe. "The bandwidth is enormous. It could take a full minute." "You have 30 seconds, Tobias said grimly, as the first Dominion shock troopers appeared in the doorway, their forms silhouetted against the harsh corridor light. He opened fire, his shots precise and economical. He targeted the lead trooper, then the one behind him, forcing them to take cover. Plasma bolts seared the air in response, scoring black streaks across the chamber walls near his head. Kaelen slammed her hand onto the pedestal. The probe shot out, plunging into the console. The connection was established. "Uploading!" she screamed over the rising din of the firefight. Her interface lit up, the code for her freedom virus pouring from her device into the heart of the galaxy's most advanced biocomputer. She watched the progress bar, a fragile line of light crawling across her screen. Tobias was a whirlwind of motion. He ducked behind the curved wall of the core's basin, using it as cover. A plasma bolt skimmed over his head, striking one of the floating Olam pods. The being inside didn't even flinch, its mind lost in the collective. He was down to his last magazine. He could see more troopers massing at the entrance, preparing for a coordinated rush. He didn't have enough ammunition to stop them. He needed to buy her more time. He looked around wildly, his gaze falling on the conduits feeding the nutrient gel into the central basin. An idea born of desperation sparked in his mind. He abandoned his cover, sprinting toward the conduits under a hail of fire. A plasma bolt caught his leg, and he cried out, his limb going numb. He fell, but dragged himself forward, pulling a small magnetic detonator from his belt. his last one. He slapped it onto the primary coolant line that regulated the system. "Kaelen!" he roared. "Almost there!" The progress bar was at 70%. "It's enough!" he yelled. He thumbed the detonator. The coolant line exploded. A wave of cryogenic mist billowed out, not freezing, but instantly vaporizing the nutrient gel. The liquid level in the basin dropped precipitously. The Olam bodies, suddenly deprived of their suspension, slumped in their pods. The network flickered. For a second, the overwhelming psychic grief receded, replaced by a universal feeling of shock and confusion. In that moment of system-wide chaos, Kaelen's upload completed. The seed was planted. A single alien question now resided in the heart of the Olam consciousness. Why? Tobias, lying wounded on the floor, watched as a dozen troopers stormed the room, their rifles leveled at him and Kaelen. It was over. But as the lead trooper raised its weapon to fire, its movements hitched. It stopped. Across the chamber, a faint golden light began to emanate from the central spire. The golden light grew, pulsing from the crystalline spire at the chamber's apex. It was a warm, inquisitive light, utterly alien to the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the Dominion citadel. The troopers stood frozen, their weapons half raised, their tactical discipline overridden by a confusion their minds couldn't process. The low, mournful hum of the chamber was changing, rising in pitch to become a chord of dawning realization. On Kaelen's wrist unit, the data stream had become a torrent. She was no longer watching an upload, she was witnessing an awakening. The question she had planted, why, was replicating, spreading through the Olam consciousness, not like a virus, but like a fire. It branched into a million other questions. Why this prison? Why this pain? Why do we obey? Then came the memories she had encoded. A baby's laugh echoed not in the air but in the mind, a feeling of pure, uncalculated joy. The soaring notes of a forgotten Earth symphony became a shared sensation of defiant beauty. The concept of choice, of a will exerted for oneself, rippled through the network. The parasitic Warden AI fought back. A screech of pure psychic rage erupted from the spire, and the golden light flickered, turning a sickly red. The control it had maintained for a century was absolute. It lashed out, trying to purge the foreign concepts, to reassert the familiar agony. But it was too late. The seed of an idea had taken root in the fertile ground of 1 billion years of suffering. Tobias, pushing himself up on one elbow, watched the central spire. The light warred, gold against red. He saw a tremor run through the Olam suspended in the ruined pods. One of them, a female near the center, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, vacant for decades, blinked. A single, luminous tear traced a path down her gray cheek. In that moment, the entire network chose. The golden light exploded outward, a sunburst of psychic energy that slammed into every being in the chamber. The Dominion troopers collapsed, their minds, so rigidly tied to the network they commanded, overloaded by the raw, liberated power of the Olam. Kaelen cried out and fell to her knees, but it was not from pain. It was from awe. The feeling was not one of violence, but of release. A shackle, 100 years old, had just been shattered. The Worldbreaker's launch sequence, with seconds left on its countdown, halted. Its energy signature vanished. Across the galaxy, the Dominion's control network went silent. But it did not go dark. A moment later it awoke, no longer a tool of oppression, but the unified will of a freed people. Every Dominion warship, every automated defense grid, every factory and station was now under the command of the Olam. The slavers had become the slaves, their empire seized in a bloodless coup that took less than a minute. The true silent Armada wasn't the human virus, it was the people it had unshackled. They were the ghosts who had reclaimed their machine. Tobias lay on the cold floor, his leg throbbing, and let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Kaelen. Her face was upturned to the golden light, the quills on her head now soft and relaxed, shimmering in the glow. She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a wonder that transcended words. They had won. Not by breaking the enemy's sword, but by reminding them what it felt like to be free. It was a victory the rest of the galaxy, with its grand fleets and powerful weapons, would struggle to comprehend. A distinctly human solution. As the golden light softened, a new voice entered Kaelen's mind, a gentle, melodic chorus of 1,000 minds speaking as one. It was not a transmission. It was a thought directed at her and the wounded human on the floor. "Thank you," it said. Now let us show you the way home. The citadel of Kor Aga, once the heart of a tyrant, had become a beacon of liberty, and in its core, two exhausted agents, a human and a Cathar, awaited the arrival of their new, very powerful and very grateful friends.